Open 2024. We're very delighted to have you here. Also, oh yeah, motion launch first. I hope everyone is already familiar with the position, yeah. Okay. Wait, bentar, bentar. Okay, we'll launch the motion in the chat box. Please just unmute if you have any question.
Interrupt
do
dikit,
we have-
no breakout room ya, kayak call lewat WA aja.
Yes, please arrange your own preferred method of case building. Do you guys have any question? Okay, no question. All right, debate starts in 15 minutes. Good luck, everyone. All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Indo Open 2024 exhibition. Yep. Without further ado, I call upon the Prime Minister. I also will time. I will give the first at 6 and 7 minute mark in the chat box. So yeah, Prime Minister, time is yours.
Right, am I audible and visible?
You're audible, but it's very echoing.
But still audible, right? Like, I cannot debate in my room because my roommate is a bit loud, so I'm very sorry for the inconvenience. But if needed, I can just move.
I'll leave it to everyone else, the other debaters. Are you okay with this audio, or does anyone have any objection? Okay, I think everyone is all good. Yeah, we can proceed.
Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. In the world where the world is unpredictable as ever, where externalities can affect your life plan, and when things outside of your control can affect how you perceive the world itself, the parents have the moral responsibility to prepare the children and leave them and not leave them unprepared as it is. This is the stance that we are in OG are going to take. We want to teach the children to go with the flow, but by implicitly, but goes more explicitly as the age goes on. What does this imply? By teaching uncertainties, we make them play games that are more unpredictable, change the routine, and give the children more control in conversation. While preparing for life plan, for example, you make them dream on, you make them draw their dreams. For example, being proactive in teaching children about their dreams and life purposes and make them prepare for the life plan early on. This implies like making the children go to piano courses or Kumon or whatnot. 2 points of case under the opening government. Firstly, why it is the moral responsibility of the parents to teach the children about going with the flow and preparing with the uncertainties in life. Because we believe that parents have moral responsibility to prepare children for long-term success, like, because this is something that is supported by the societal narrative. This is the responsibility that given by religion and religious value, for example, and there is the inherent bond between the parents and children. That's why you want your children to succeed to begin with, right? However, if you want to teach your children to succeed, then you have to prepare the children with the conditions of life, which is more and more uncertain as days goes on. You have externalities, both macro, with the social economic condition, with the change of regulation, with the conditions of geopolitics, for example, but also in micro level, where your friends can turn on you, where your grades can go up and down, and dependent on what your teacher is, and you can have your different schools, different societies, different groups of friends in and of itself. That is why the world, even for children, is more uncertain, right? We believe that teaching the teaching the children for this uncertainty more likely to work, because one, it teaches the children to be adaptable in life in and of itself. This is important because the prerequisite for you to have a life plan in and of itself is that you are able to look from the macro perspective, have a helicopter view, and have the capability to weigh the situation. This is going to be teach best by if you are teaching adaptability first. So prerequisite of you to be able to teach your children life plan even in long term, you must be able to teach your children to be adaptive and able to react to the changing situation. But secondly, this will teach your children to be a generalist, because you have to, exactly when you prepare for all situation, you have to be preparing for every single circumstances that may happen with all the knowledge that you have. That exactly with this nature of being generalist in and of itself is going to be suiting for the children in the long term, exactly because it teaches them to be a good leader, for example. This is important because you are able to game the system to gain your advantage with all the unpredictabilities and uncertainties in life. So the way is simple. The parents should teach their children in a way that could prepare them, and exactly because the world is uncertain, then the parents must teach their children about the uncertainties of life. But second argument, regarding why is it in the interest of the parents? We believe that the interest of the parents in this world is so that their children could be happy, and the process of teaching the values to children to be fun, right? As parents, you don't want your children to cry all the time, to be depressed, but also you want the children to be accepting the values that you are teaching in a fun manner that is not really stressful for you as a parents, because you still have other responsibilities such as work and providing foods for your children and your family. Therefore, you want to make teaching these values as fun as possible. I think this is in line by teaching the children about the uncertainties of life, with the interest of the parents itself, because it is easier and more fun for the children to accept it. Why is that? Because teaching your children about the uncertainties of life implies that your children will be faced with plays or activities that require children to be proactive in and of itself, right? This is good in two ways. Firstly, because exactly when your children is engaging, you are more likely to, the children are more likely to accept the values that you are teaching in and of itself, because it's not like you're telling them what to do, but you allow the children to be more proactive in and of itself. But secondly, this will benefit the bond between the children and the parents in and of itself, because you are having more fun by by teaching your children and whatnot. Exactly, this is why, for example, it will dump your previous fear, for example, to have children to begin with, because there is growing societal narrative where like teaching children is something that is difficult and whatnot, and therefore very daunting. Before I move on, yes, CO.
How does it look like for the children to choose their path on your side? Do they try everything they meet along the way, like what you imply, or how does it work?
Now, of course, it will grow in difficulty in older as age goes on, right? First of all, you will teach your children plays with more unpredictability in and of itself. Then, as the age goes on, you will going into more difficult conversation and difficult games. For example, this is what I already explained in my setup. But the comparative that the opposition have to defend is that by having your life plan to your children and preparing it, because it is the suitable thing to make sure your children is preparing because of it, it is going to be absolutely worse off for the children, exactly because it shackles the children to make them prepare for their life plan in and of itself, take them away from the happiness and the innocence of the childhood by making them going to courses, by making them going to classes and whatnot, to ensure that they have the head start into the future in and of itself. I think future can be prepared later on. However, insofar as your children is still young, they should be having the opportunity to play around, to have fun with their innocence and whatnot, to ensure that they are not depressed in long term, as so many, for example, child superstars have faced in once they are older. Exactly for all those reasons, proud to propose.
Right, thank you so much for the speech. Now I call upon the leader of opposition. Time is yours. Also, a very gentle reminder for everyone to state your POI preference. And yeah, I think that's all.
Okay, cek. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Oke, sebentar ya. If you wanna POI, tulis di chat aja, karena aku juga lihat kolom chat. Ntar aku buka timer. Alright, I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, what does opposition want in this debate? We think we want two things. Number one, obviously, we want children to have life plan as a children that is being taught by the parents instead of like going with the flow and just accepting life as is. But what does it actually mean to have a life plan? We think it consists of three things that is important. Number one, life plan consists of you analyzing available resources that you have at your disposal. This means that children will have a realistic life plan that is obviously also assisted by the parents as well to identify the resources that they are available, maybe like monetary, financial, and whatever. And number two, the plan also consists of how you specifically want to carry out the plan, like how you will execute the plan, how it is going to be conducted, and whatsoever. This means that children will also still value the things about process. They will still value learning about struggle as well in outside the house. Lastly, about it consists of the outcome of the plan, the expected outcome of the plan. For example, if we successful, obviously we are grateful, but then we also take note what we are good at, for example, or maybe if we fail, we don't just cry. We obviously cry, but not just that. We also take note what parts do we could improve on. Maybe, for example, if we score low in a particular part of an exam, for example, we can improve that and we can learn from that and whatsoever. And also, you need to mind, I need to remind you that inside the stages of these plans, there will obviously be detail about the backup of the plan. So if one plan fails, for example, we have something to fall back on and not just like one rigid plan that's gonna have to be followed by the children. Number two, we think that we assume that we're going to play in a moderate scenario of the parents' characteristic, right? Because we think that this life plan is not just created by the dictatorship of the parent, right? They're not going to say like, oh, you gotta go to medical school and no arguments, right? Obviously, the children will also have a say in the plan as well. They can say to their parents what they want. Like if they want to go with a music school or whatever, we help them create detailed plan for going to music school and become successful artists. So right, that's possible because like if the parent is just like very harsh to you, even without this motion, your life is going to be miserable anyway, right? Okay, so I will have that's my setup. So I will have two rebuttals probably to opening government. Number one, they told us that it is important for you to teach children to go with the flow because it gives a realistic depiction of the necessity for you to be adaptable in life, because that's how the reality of the world works. You need to be adaptable in life and whatsoever. Number one, we think several responses. Number one, we think you shouldn't play into the Jedi mind tricks of the opening government. We think that adaptability is indeed the prerequisite, but it can happen in outside the house because what I've mentioned to you earlier, these backup plans also teach you about adaptability. If you don't be successful at plan one, it's okay. You can try again with another plan that we have in place for you, right? So adaptability is still exists in outside the house. But second response, why adaptability is much better in our side of the house is because we don't get what sort of manifestation of adaptability in OG, right? Like, okay, if I fail one, you don't have anything to fall back on. These children are more likely up to decide for themselves what to do in opening government, and the decision that they make is probably not very good because maybe the parent intervene too much because it's the heat of the moment of failure, or maybe the children panic as well in the moment of failure when you go with the flow without a rigid plan in place. Okay. Yeah, that's the engagement that I probably have to opening government. And let's just move on to my argument that I will present is that why this mechanism of having life plan is actually crucial to children's considering their characterization. You need to understand that children's obviously tend to be volatile because they're still figuring out who they want to be, right? Maybe sometimes they feel lost of who they want to be. For example, because they're such a young age, or maybe like they just don't have the understanding of the harsh reality of the world, for example. So there's three things on why this is important to children to have a life plan. Number one, we think that life plan provides purpose and motivation. This means that having a plan gives these children a sense of purpose and a sense of direction, helping them to work on a specific goal, right? Because without a plan, these children will lack motivation and feel lost. This leads obviously to maybe a sense of aimlessness, for example, on their side of the house. So in our world, we think that a clear path that is already defined encourages children to pursue goal with more intention, and it keeps them accountable and focused even when life gets challenging. Because let's compare it to their side of the house. Even if somehow there is a purpose within these children, it's less fulfilling because they can take it for granted. Like for example, on their side of the house, children will feel like, okay, today I want to learn guitar, but tomorrow maybe I will learn debate. The day after that, I want to learn about like becoming YouTuber. Um, on their side of the house, you get really excited at the beginning of each of these stage, probably way more excited than you are in opening opposition. But you cannot maintain that because you don't have a clear plan to keep you accountable, and you don't have a clear plan of how exactly are you gonna reach that goal, right? You don't know how to gonna the progress of learning your guitar, or maybe the progress of learning debate, for example. So it's less fulfilling to these children because it's only fulfilling at the very beginning. And number two, we think that in our side of the house, um, children can understand that we should make realistic decision. They can think critically about the world around them, anticipate obstacle, and strategize their decision with a clear plan. Right? This does not happen on their side of the house. And the last that I want to what I wanted to say is that how in our side of the house these children are better at embracing failure, because this is what we fear the most as human. This is important because we want to embrace failure. If we fail, of course. I mean, if successful, that's good, right? Um, the first one, accepting failure, is much better in our side of the house because these children know that at least they tried their best and they fail because of objective things, probably, for example, in exam, or maybe they fail because of things out of their control. So it's easier for them to accept their failure and embrace that. On their side of the house, this is much different because you're most likely going to blame yourself, for example, when like you feel like you make a wrong decision, for example, or maybe you blame your parents instead. And number two, moving on from failure is much better because we can make objective decision based on objective assessment also in our side of the house. With all that reason, we are proud to oppose.
All right, I think the speaker for the speech. Now I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. Time is yours.
Hi, just checking am I both audible and visible?
Yes, you're audible.
POI just threw unmute. Might take one from closing, but just don't capture. I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. As how scary the future is, we need to understand that a lot of things are not under our control. And Herbie, your mistake does not define you. It is what you choose to do after the mistake that matters. I want to clarify one thing, right? I think opening options clearly mistaken the burden of the emotions, because if they want to opt in the word, the children can adapt with the uncertainties that happen in their life, because a lot of things are apparently not under children's control, then that means you must vote for opening government, because this is exactly what stands that we are proposing in our Southern House, right? I think this is true exactly because of two reasons. Number one, when you as parents taught the children to adapt with a lot of uncertainties that happen in their life, you probably cannot predict your friends' movements or how your friends improves in class competitions, right? And Herbie, the only thing that you can do is just try the best. And irrespective of whether you can get the first rank in your class is up to the discussions later on. But insofar as you try the best and there are a lot of things that you cannot control, that means you're likely to settling down your expectations in our student house. And that's what we call as adaptability. This is not going to happen in opening oppositions for the simple reasons that if something is not under the children's control, then the children are more likely to expand their capacity to control that. And Herbie are likely to overwhelm children more on their side. I'll explain this further. I want to answer the debate based on two parts. One, about future certainty. Second, about how children would experience their life during the process of growing up. One, about future certainty. I think this is very much important because having a plan in your life for preparing about the future is useless because the percentage of that successful plan is probably just 50%. And the reason for that is because one, people have limited cognitive ability. And insofar that opening options cannot prove why you can make plan that is perfectly formulated, because you might know the fact that you plan to win the bidding competition. But then again, the simple plan to that case is practice, join comms, and win. So simple, right? But in reality, it's very hard because you must forecast your competitor's ability. You must also be prepared for a potential dark horse, a good institution that suddenly came up out of nowhere and steal the trophy. So you do not have access to all that information. That means you are unlikely to make perfect plan and be failing. But secondly is that having plan make you perfectly become ambitious. Now for the entirety of your life as children, you might fixated your eyes to one goal. And I think opening options cannot just say you will have more plan, because if that's the case, then which plan that you want to achieve in the first place, right? So you are unlikely to focus more on one goal, and Herbie, you are unlikely to have meaningful choice in the rest of the house. If your goal is probably now become McKinsey's consultant or become astronaut, etc., I think this is generally bad because this limit the scope of happiness that you can get can only be obtained as if you can successfully achieve that plan. I think this is exactly because other than the main plan that you execute, other things would be considered as failure and not worthy. And Herbie, the happiness that you get is significantly less in utilitarian and oppositions rather than in opening government. So now there's a way up here, right? The possibility of plan failing is huge when you made other plans to achieve something. Other people would also do the same thing to achieve it, right? And Herbie, this is a zero-sum game. There were too many externalities involved in the decision making, and that is why we must improvise and compromise with uncertainty in our life. I think Jason already explained that you might feel failure, feel something unexpected happen in your life. You might see your parents dying because of accident while you are planning to live with them until like 50 or 60 years old, but that's life. Short and unpredictable. And during that process, what's matter was your mental state to prepare with that uncertainty. I think this is good in opening government. Why? Because whenever something bad happens since you were kids, your parents will teach you that there is a meaning behind that incident. When your parents died because of uncertainty, it is a sign for you to be completely independent now. That means during the process of a lot of externalities that are currently happening, you're likely to obtain the positive lesson in contrast to the negative lesson and focus where your plan is failing. That means there's a positive sign of growth exclusivity in opening government in contrast to opening oppositions. Thirdly, I think having plan failing is also bad coping mechanisms as well. Why? Whenever you are failing as a person, you're likely to blame yourself. Oh, I'm not smart enough, even though some of accidents are out of your control. And I think insofar as opening up cannot give proper engagement to differentiate why children have the ability to determine something is out of their control or not, then they cannot refute this material. I think in opening government, we argue you cannot differentiate that because mostly this happen in a critical moment in your life, because you are likely to feel irrational to the points where you are unlikely to think about what a plan that you can fix and discover which one is work and which one is not when you're losing competitions. So that means like it is very hard for you to cope from these situations, right? The comparative fighting in opening government, we better cope because we admit some of the problems are not happening in our life, happen because of externalities, not because of us. And Herbie, you can blame that externalities to ensure that you can cope better. And I think even since you were kids, you already been identify what is the thing that you can control and you cannot control. In opening government, you would be taught in a class competitions, you probably need to do your best by learning, studying, etc. But you cannot control once again what will your friends do, and Herbie likely to settle your expectations once again. In contrast to making plan, I think the prerequisite of making good plan is you must making sure everything is under your control, right? You must ensure that you can predict your friends' movements, how much hours they will study to get the first rank in class, etc. Not only all these informations are overwhelming, but also you're likely to divide your focus as what opening options themselves identify, which is plan A, B, and C, to think about all the variables that you can control in contrast to adapt towards something that you cannot control. Herbie, emotionally, it is harmed children's cognitive development because of overwhelming pressure on their future. Therefore, we knew it is already a bad thing. Before that, closing. Opening? Okay, so yeah. Secondly, how children would experience their life. I think this is also important as well. Parents want to know how children will grow in our side, and I think I cannot just say that all children would not know about what would they do in golf as what COPLI, because I found out it is insulting. Because the debate was never about find a goal and meaning, but rather how do you execute that goal? Because goal is prior to these motions. Meaning and goal in life is not exclusive to just making plan. Even without you make plan to become president and astronaut, you already know you want to be them because you idolize them or you saw inspiration from other people. Therefore, the tipping point is not on find meaning, but rather how you can execute that. I think life that is fixated into one plan is worse, and Op cannot claim that you cannot have very flexible plans, because if this is the case, that means you need to spend a lot of resources and doing a lot of trial and error. So the calculative resources that all claim is strategic is actually the opposite, right? And unlikely to happen in their certain house. But I think I will flip this by claiming an open government, you in fact are likely to make good plan. Because in order for you to be able to adapt in certain circumstance, you must experience something bad first, right? And this is the moment when your resources are likely to be invested into something that is strategic. So for instance, if you lost debating competitions, then now you know, oh, why I lost? Probably because my speech was bad, my speech was under time. So now you must focus more on your speech that is under time, in contrast to calculating a lot of variables why your speech was bad. So actually experiencing failure in and of itself is not a bad thing, because now you can identify in the future what you can improve, and then later on inject all the resources that you have, which is limited to that entirety of your problems. So that means we do understand that as children we experience a lot of failures. At no point we should make children overwhelmed to a lot of plans that is very bizarre.
All right, thank you for that speech. Now I call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Time is yours.
Just check, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, bentar. Let me set up my personal timer.
Okay.
Yeah, under there.
Please, yeah, kind of make your volume larger. Maksudnya
Oke,
bicara
oke.
yang lebih keras aja.
Oke, bentar. Hello, is it better?
Yes, it's much better.
Okay. Wait a second. All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Couple things to start the argumentation, right? Number one, sure, this world is unpredictable, like what opening government said. I think all benches should agree and have concession on that. Some leader and regulation are changing, economic becoming way too complex. I think that's just inevitable. The world just changing and we need to adapt, that's for sure. The question that become then, how are you going to deal with that situation? What OG forget is that parents are diverse. And you may born in a privilege, but some people are done. This is something that's super important to talk about, because you cannot just simply let your children deal with uncertainty and just simply follow the flow if you're not living in a privilege, because you cannot back them up when they need you the most. And that's exactly why the setup that comes from Ranga does matter. And this is specific contextualization that OG always forget, because you always assume that once you are dealing with uncertainty, you can just simply adapt. But adaptation is not that easy, ladies and gentlemen. And this is the core point that is missing in opening government. They're just way too idealistic, and we don't like that. But number two, if you fight random difficulty by learning random courses in opening government or in GovBench as a whole, it does not lead you into learning process, but instead it leads you into confusion, because right now you are forced to adapt on yourself. Even when your parents want to support you, what they teach to you most likely is just, okay, just let go with the flow. You don't need any plan, just do what you want, do what you like. And that's exactly the picturization that will happen in opening government or closing government. We don't want that in opening opposition. What we want is a more structural way to achieve certain goal that is realistic, because we want a calculative mindset to be constructed to these children, not because they are forced to do it, but because they need it as a children. And since parents have the responsibility to teach children how to survive, like what Prime Minister tried to characterize, I think this ability is super important, and this is why opening oppositions triumph. I have two argumentation in my speech, including all of the responses. Number one, I will talk about the form of plan that will be constructed in opening opposition and why it will be something that is a better learning process for these children, challenging the whole idea of opening government regarding learning process and such. Number two, I will talk about how we will have these children generally, why it will most likely be more beneficial for these children if they have like a proper planning to teach on. Right? So everything will be negative. Let's just directly proceed. Number one, what kind of plan that will be in opening opposition is way too complex. Hence, our plan will likely to fail. And you cannot rely on backup plan because you will see yourself as a failure once you fail in one plan over another. We agree on the complexity, but three structural reasons why it's not something that will be that is a problem in our opening government, right? Number one, most of the argumentation regarding the plan will be failing and how the children will see themselves as a failure is most likely a matter of technicalities. How so? One, if you talk about gaining information, creating forecasts towards, your competitor, for example, sure, it's something that's uncertain. However, you can mitigate that by using your capacity as a parent. Someone who lives longer, way longer than your children, someone who have experience over failing over and over again. I don't think it's wise for a parent to make their children facing the same the same mistake as what they did in the past and make them suffer in the same way as what you felt in the past just because you want to make them facing the reality, right? I think what is wiser as a parent is to teach them how to prevent such thing from happening, and that's why you use your experience as a parent. This is the kind of thing that we will use to construct our planning, right? We're not just simply going to blatantly create like general plan and such. We're going to use this experience as the basis, and this is why it's something that is the failure can be mitigated. But number two, if you talk about children will see themselves as a failure, I think it's unlikely because this scenario will only happen and it's highly contingent on how parents treat you when you're failing in certain plan. I think it's only happen when your parents is a tiger parents that will yells at you, shame you when you fail in certain planning. However, we're not going to go in such contextualization, right? We say that we live in a moderate case, moderate contextualization when this parent is not a dictator. They are not like some tiger parenting, strict parents whatsoever. Yes, maybe they have certain expectation, but we say the expectation that happen in opening opposition is not something that is corrosive, but rather something that will be constructive for these children. So once these children fail, we will hug them first, embrace them. It's saying that it's okay when you fail, we still have another plan, and try to reconstruct another plan based on that particular failure. I think this is exactly what the type of plan that will be constructed in opening opposition. So how it will be better in learning process, right? I think it will be better in learning process under two reasoning. Number one, because I think that by utilizing such way of creating plan creation, I think it also lead into the ability for these children to be way more calculative, and this is exactly the goal that we want in opening opposition. What kind of calculation that we are talking about? Like, I think we are talking about the ability to analyze the ability to analyze and try to search for the root cause of problem, becoming way more critical than you are. This is exactly the thing that you need to adapt, right? Adaptation only happens when you have like proper planning. Without proper planning, you cannot adapt, and even if you can adapt, most likely the cost will just way higher. This is why we don't like adaptation in opening government. But second argumentation, how it will help the children generally, right? I think generally it will help the children under two major issue. One, let's contextualize the children first. Considering the fact that family are diverse in status quo. Some of them are not privileged. Some of the children was bound to be like a sandwich generation, right? Someone who need to take care of their parents and maybe their siblings. I think this contextualization matter, because if you live in such contextualization, you cannot simply go like randomly into facing and following the flow, right? I think you need a proper planning to be able to take care of those particular problems. This is important because these people were underprivileged and is a sandwich generation, is the most vulnerable actor. And the way we're going to handle that is basically by creating a proper planning, and that's why we back to a post.
All right, thank you for the speech. To open the case of the closing half, I call upon the member of government. Time is yours.
Hi, is this audible?
Yes, you're audible.
All right. Perfect method of PR, please through chat box. We'll start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Exactly the context of these people having no privilege under OO, exactly that's the case how CJ is going to kick OO out of this debate. When people have no privilege, most likely they have no access to have such good coping mechanism whenever they have their life plan is not well executed, right? Under the opening debate, it's they have little attention to parents as the core actor, right? So the team that must win in this debate is the team that can that has the ability to show you how this is within the interest of these parents, right? In so far as CJ able to prove you why this is within the interest of the parents, that parents also vulnerable in this case, we're going to outweigh OG and even OO, right? First thing to talk to you is on the idea of how under of the house, we're going to be talking about how we are going to create such easier coping mechanism towards the children. And as parents, you don't want to be having the blame game. That's how we're going to take this debate, right? But to pictures the work clear that, by the way, OG did not do really well in this debate, right? How does the work will look like on both sides of the house? Inside CG, then children will be introduced to many life scenarios, including how they cannot always get every choice they wish to have because life cannot always be in favor with them. It happens in these small details and small things that they encounter as a children. Children will also be introduced with many life activities rather than driving them what to do, what course to take. If they like piano, then they can choose it instead of Kumon and math courses. We also set a narrative as a parents that you are on your own later in the future. You are allowed to pick and choose your life decision in your college, work, and hobbies. Guidance is always there, but it's limited to comparing scenarios, providing them the insights. But the decision is still up to the children, that we never dictated the answer, that we always happy the children to think and choose on their own. And the comparative outside position is most likely it always involves parent interference, especially when children have less life experience. Lifeline will be dictated based on what parents want. But even if it's not, and it happens in moderate context that OO claims, parents will always implement fear mongering implicitly. If you have no plan, you are most likely to fail. And if you have plan, you must execute it well because you already have plan, right? One thing to prove you, right? We're teaching children to go with the flow, prevent parents from catching the blame game. These arguments become so much important for you to note because this caters to the most interest of the actor that we're debating as a parents, right? At the context of status quo, the one perceived to be vulnerable is always the children. While it's not wrong, parents are oftentimes vulnerable, but never getting enough spotlight, right? What we are talking about, right? Why is this something that is true? Because 3 reasons, right? Firstly, being a parent isn't always a free will, because opposition should probably come to this debate by saying that blaming parents for their consent of giving birth is something that's totally fine. But it's not always the case, right? Because you have actual forces from conservative families, demand for having a grandchildren, continuing legacy, social norms, and structural reasons, right? This not always want to give birth, contributing to scarcity in our population, but because they are forced to do so, they don't want to be blamed because of the uncertainty of success of the children, right? But even if that's the case, that these parents actually have the consent to give birth to their children, exactly that's how you protect your children, because you already undergo a lot of life experience to make sure that they are prevented from such harms of the life, right? Secondly, it's on the idea of how every parent is on their first time of being a parent. Meaning you don't know how to actually be a good parent that make sure that your children are going to be successful. That's why it's so much important for you to note that these parents don't want to be blamed for things that they don't have the capacity to begin with, right? But thirdly, is that because they are most likely the one that's always taking the blame, because people always question what value the parents is injecting when the children is failing, because you have a huge responsibility as a parent to begin with, right? This is something that's so much overwhelming, because not only that you should be having your own life as an individual, but you also need to emphasize and need to ensure that your children's well-being and family pride is also at stake. What if the children is failing because they are blending in life, like what opposition claims, right? Because they are just being lazy and whatsoever. under us of the house. No, that doesn't mean parents will just let them be lazy, because you can simply say you should plan in with your life, but you should know what's also best for you. But you need to also have more effort to force children planning into such system, to such a capitalist system, to be able to actually have plan, to be in Deloitte and Big Four and whatsoever, because you need to put much more effort to put them in a good high schools, for example, and things like that, right? But secondly is that the problem is not on our parenting, that life probably makes you failing, because it's on the system that the elitists have made to be able to fulfill the demand of workforce and whatsoever. So you need to be fearful the moment you cannot have structurized LinkedIn professional experience. The problem is on the system. So we question why then you have to put it on the blame towards the parents to always force them to teach these children to have such life plan, right? But how is this significant on CG, right? In comparison to our opening, success is always uncertain. We're not taking too much burden to prove how this mechanism can eventually lead for these parents to provide better life of the children, to be able to give happiness to their children. The most visible thing to do as a parent is that this is a way to get away from blame, because you don't want to be blamed as a parent, but also to give the utmost free will to the children. So it becomes a win-win solution under us at the house, that this children is not going to be forced, and also understanding that uncertainty is there. Exactly, the context from OG happens after you have the context from closing government. Here's the impact that makes us become much more important, right? Rather than focusing on how children should be successful in having life plan in comparative and opposition, it's better for you to have to spend your time to pass life day by day happily with your children, simply because you go with the flow. Because one thing that you need to note is that little things in life is being taken for granted, because what the people think now is to make sure that life plan is executed well. You already have a mind that is future oriented, so you're not living in the present time, right? We want to appreciate more things, little things in more time, because you have limited time with your children, exactly with the context that your parents is not going to live forever with you, like what opposition said, right? Secondly, then, on the idea of accessibility of coping mechanism, that to directly engage on opening opposition, talking about the privilege, in so far we're able to engage directly to opening opposition, that OG has failed to do so, we're going to be automatically upper than OG, right? Because under the premise of parents want the best for their children, the premise is the simple, right? The ability to opt out from life surprises is a privilege, exactly what opposition said, that is not necessarily accessible equally to all layers of society. Because what most likely happen under the narrative to prioritize life plan is that you need to structurize your life plan, right? But what does it take to plan things? You need to answer the feasibility, because what's the objective of planning if it's not going to be well executed? Resources to make sure that you're able to execute such plan. But when life doesn't always, but when life serves you lemon, then people will always guilt trip themselves, having the moral dilemma to be able to process the failure. The context happens under CG, exactly, right? Because it's a form of constant changes that you need to take. But the problem is a deep sorrow to fail as a human is something that not everyone can take, right? How is this problematic? The ability is not for everyone. For minorities, for example, that always afraid of such failure, the guilt tripping is always there. In comparison to the house, you have more acceptance. This is what probably life just gives me, and this is what's the best for me. You have no benchmark. If the baseline is that minimum, then you actually might have positive growth under our side of the house when you don't have plans to begin with for those reasons proposed.
All right, thank you so much for the speech. Now I call upon the member of opposition. Time is yours.
POI unmute. I think the biggest burden that government needs to identify is how then thriving children would be under their house. Because there has not been a single explanation coming from government in explaining why children specifically, in moments when they counter failure, which they claim to be unpredictable, these children will still have the desire to actually bounce back. What they understand is that, when you go with the flow of uncertainties, children will most likely find another route. Children will most likely find another way to reach that success, but never really explain why it's actually feasible and likely to begin with under their side of the house. Therefore, closing opposition is going to be the only bench talking about this. But before moving on to my substantive, I have few setups to actually clarify what the opening opposition tried to posit in this debate. I think first, opening opposition never really explained how does making plans looks like in this debate. Therefore, we think that making plans in opposition looks like on how parents are going to, guide their children, asking them, what they want to achieve in the next 1 to 5 years. In most of the time, this is also going to be a realistic life plan in which all government claims talking about high expectations, talking about how children are going to be pressured and so on and so forth is something that is very much ridiculous. But I think the second thing that all three benches fail to explain is on the idea of uncertainty. What is uncertainty? Within that both three benches talks about uncertainty as something that is very much prevalent, whether closing opposition think that uncertainty is not as prevalent as what both government bench are trying to say. In most cases, we can still think that things can still go in our favor. But even if, uncertainty happens, within that uncertainty can also happens because something that you didn't learn, or something that when you do things in vain as well. In golf, within that, when parents are in opposition, when parents teaching children to make life plans, most likely parents are also going to occupy a lot of access to prepare them to reach their dreams. For example, if they make plans to be the first rank in class, most probably the parents are also going to teach their children, occupy their children with school courses and so on and so forth. If the children wants to be a doctor, most likely parents are also going to occupy the children with, courses and so on and so forth to be able to go to med school. This means that the specific setup entails to the idea that sometimes making plans is so much important to negate the idea of possible uncertainties that proposition is trying to claim. Two things that I'm going to talk in my speech. First, why parents need to teach their children in regards of uncertainty. But second, how parents should what is the interest of parents. But first, I think talking about parents teaching their children in regards of uncertainty is something very much important. I'm going to bite the bullet why parents are okay to be a bit restrictive in a certain sense. First, I think being restrictive means parents are preventing their children from opting into something less mindful. We have to understand that children are still in the cope of peak idealism. That is why sometimes children dream to fly to the moon. That is why sometimes children makes irrational decisions at the very first place. Why is that so? Because most of the time, children are still built under the delusion and notion set by the society that anything is possible. The only key for you to be good is to dream big and so on and so forth, because this is the narrative that we've been subscribing to, and this is what society tells us. But the less experience in life, the less downfall that the children have, or even if they have downfall, most probably they don't necessarily feel the harm of it, because most likely the one who feels the harm are the parents. The lack of experience making them lacking of like the rationality on what is currently happening in the real world, how does the real world is working, meaning that this is the obligation of parents to be restrictive to prevent their children from opting into something that is very, very irrational. But second, within that, parents have the helicopter view. Understand that for children, self-actualization is still very minimum, because children are less likely to be aware of their self-potential, because self-actualization requires a lifetime process, requires a lot of trial and errors, requires you a lot of things to do to actually know what they actually want to do. The easiest way of self-actualization, which is the cheat sheets, or easiest way for children to identify their self-actualization, is from third-party perspective that most probably knows their interest the best, because parents are the closest people that these children are with, meaning that this third perspective coming from parents who actually have, to a certain sense, have the idea of knowing the interest of children, makes it that it's very important for these children, for these parents who have like a helicopter view towards the children. What does this argument entail? So I think first, most of the time, this fulfills parents' obligation to actually make the children be more careful. But second, children in closing opposition have more opportunity to have a better self-actualization in determining what is their goal before moving into executing their goal. Because the most important thing in life plan and uncertainty is first to understand what do you really want. But moving to the second argument then, how parents should teach their children in accordance with their interests. I think first, parents want their children to be resilient. Why then resilient? resilience is something exclusive inside closing opposition. Sure, opening government said we still have goals, but we prioritize the means of reaching the goal. But opening government never really contextualized why, when you rely on the notion of unpredictability, your children will still have the interest to thrive. Because realistically, what will happen in government side is children would most likely lower their goal. For example, when they dream to be A, when failure comes, the most realistic thing is to, opt into something lower. Why is that so? Because I think first, children are not ready to opt out from the comfort zone, so they would do anything still in the favor of their comfort zone to reach something, but they compromise the output of it. But second, we think that children are not used to changes. So even if you want to, teach them changes under their side of the house, most probably it's less likely to going to happen. What is the output then of this argument? I think first, when you teach them resilience, when you teach them to stick with their plan, most likely they have more incentive to bounce back, and it's going to be more sustainable for their career. Because parents are not going to be able to stick with their children for 24/7, so the only thing that parents can do is to teach them how to be sustainable and to bounce back. For all those reasons, affirm.
All right, thank you for that speech. Now I call upon the government whip.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. For POY, unmute yourself. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Lao Tzu once said, sometimes you just have to go with the flow and offer at least resistance to the thoughts and happenings. We think the ability to adapt to the uncertainties and complexity of life is important to liberate ourselves from having a rose-tinted view of how our life should unfold. This directly pointed out one fatal mistake by any teams aside from CG. Because notice that externalities and complexity of life is not something exclusively faced by children. Because any of the benches tells you that children is vulnerable, but this debate specifically also talks about the parents' capacity to involve in the externalities and the complexity of the life. This is what directly differs us from previous debate, because OG argues that children are the one involved in uncertainty, but O argues the benefit of certainty from having a life plan, for example. CG, like CO have also a vertical extension of that, right? But all of the outcomes about being success or about being failure, for example, are simply not the priority of this debate and are all too good to be true, which is why CG is the only team that should win this debate, because we are the only teams that argue the feasibility of parenting itself. Notice the first two words in this motion as parents, right? So we analyze in few ways here. Firstly, we say that quarter-life crisis and losing the direction of life is not a harm happening inside the government work like what the LO said. It is instead a harm that happens inside opposition. Realizes the motivation and passion that opposition glorifies so much is the reason why many people often facing, the quarter-life crisis in the middle of chasing their goals. Because since they are young, since that they are still a children, for example, the direction of their life is already being set by their parents, that they have to imagine themselves to become the most successful person in the world, for example, to become the 3-star Michelin chef, or to become an artist who sells $1 million artwork. We think the motivation is probably because their parents have poured their money to send them into Kumon and planted massive expectation on them to become successful. You did not just follow the life plan, but you also probably want to become the best of that plan and to become the most outstanding person in your class, which is why life plan is not as simple as what opposition characterized, that you just have a direction of life and you have an idea to how your life is going to be, for example, but you also probably are going to engage towards the standard of how good that life plan is, right? So within the feasibility is definitely something that should be, explained by opposition. Secondly, it is what defines you as a person. Because when your field is already being set to achieve certain things, for example, your life is centered towards how you achieve that goals. It becomes something that has no return since you are still young, i.e. that achieving academic success is directly affecting your personal fulfillment. For example, when you fail to become the champion of certain competition, you feel like the life is crumpled down, for example, because you think that you're not going to be successful in the future, or getting into the best college is what defines you as a person, because getting into the best college means that you're going to have a successful life to be able to get into Deloitte, for example, which is why you're less resilient towards failure and hardship in life, because you cannot have that other ideas of not becoming the ideal version of yourself, right? So the process of having life plans means that you involve yourself towards the externalities of life, to involve yourself towards something that is beyond your control, like supernatural forces like God behind your success, that there's a luck, that there's also takdir and nasib. But moreover, there are structural and systemic problems like the access to wealth and birth of lottery, for example. So you are set inside opposition because you have invested your whole life to have an ideal life, for example. So you have a benchmark, so you have something to achieve. But inside proposition, we don't have the expectation for life, so it is far easier to accept failure, for example, right? So this is at least better because opposition can prove either why their plan can be achieved, why the plan can be mediocre, and why they will be happy to achieve mediocre plan. Why being mediocre is probably okay, right? So if not, we can fair to assume why the plan is likely to become, something that is very hard to achieve. So it is far easier to accept failure inside a proposition when we don't have the benchmark to how our life should be, when we don't have the rose tinted glasses about how our life direction, for example. So this is at least better than opposition, in the end of the day, because we also explain this is bad for parents, right? This is equal to digging a hole for you as a parents, that you are also going to involve in externalities, because parents are the first teacher of the child, right? When you will also feel responsible towards your children's values, because you are the one who set their life plan for them. You are the one who told them to become a successful doctor, because you think that most doctor is the one who have the most wages in the current state of school. You are the reason behind the failure, because you don't have enough money to send them to Harvard, but you send them to a random university instead, which is a direct manifestation of harm of what Oji said about sending children to Kumon, because parents are the main perpetrator of their children's failures, for example, right? So to prevent that, as a parent, you will only be appreciated by your children when you fulfill the standard of what a good parent in most of the time, which is like to fulfill the material benefits, right? Which is why you will force yourself to sacrifice more, and that you are going to, work 9 to 5 jobs, or you are going to find side jobs, for example, in order to fulfill your responsibilities as a parents, right? This is the most significant distinction between parents in CG, because we give parents the ability to opt up, right? We believe that by giving less responsibilities for the parents, then these parents will probably have more capacity to engage in their children's life more positively, because they have less stress. For example, we believe that these parents don't need to work all the time and spend time but they can also like spend some time for me time, for happiness. So another reason why this benefit our side is because that if parents have more time to rest, they will have more time to spend with their family, for example, to go on a vacation without having to thinking that, oh, you know what, if I do not work right now, my children is going to fail because we cannot afford the courses fee and also the tuition fee of their college, for example, right? So we think that giving children's affection is something that is uniquely happening inside CJ. But realize that as parents, you also don't have 100% capacity either, right? You also don't have the helicopter view towards the rapidly changing world, for example. What you think is that, oh, if I work harder now, my children will be happier. We think this is also a false expectation that ultimately will harm the dynamics of the relationship of the family inside opposition, right? Because we think that parents also have lots of burden to go to work, which is like when they ultimately sacrifice their happiness just for the sake of gaining a better life for their children. We think that they also most of the time will trauma dump the expectation towards the children, right? They will also feel angry when they see that the children is being lazy and not studying instead, so they are going to shame them for not studying and etc. Right? Which is why this is also something that is double-edged sword that will happen inside opposition if you force your children to having a fixed life plans, for example, because there's an also expectation for you, and also there's a responsibility for you as a parents to fulfill the existing standard that exists, because children's livelihood and also like the quality of their life is like contingent on the capacity of you as a parents to provide them financial incentive, to provide them motivation and etc. Right? So we are the only one who solves this issue. We directly decrease the roles of parents in setting the direction of the life of the children, which means that you are probably also going to, not being the one who blame behind the failures of the children. We are so proud to propose.
All right, thank you for your speech. To close the entire debate, I call upon the opposition. With time is yours.
POI through his hand. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Setting up kids to fail is the biggest sin a parent could do. We initially agree that both options can work, but the goal of the debate is to evaluate which teaching method will least likely to fail the kids, and we both decided government side is setting up kids to fail because exactly, you make them a being a pessimistic individual that life is very hard and nothing is in your control eventually. Whereas the reality is, as a kid, as what Sharon have already told you, you need an initial motivation to pursue your life. You need to have an initial motivation to calculate what you want to do at the end of the day to overcome the risk of your options, for example, or of your of the choice that you made, for example. And this is what we define under causing opposition. I think so in my speech I will evaluate opening opposition first and then go directly to the government side. We appreciate OO for their portrayal of what it looks like to have plans, so why is this important regarding the adaptability, a sense of purpose, and so on and so forth. However, we think OO has never given further justifications and nuance into the motion why parents in itself is the right actor to direct their children's life into having a plan, right? In this case, CO is the only team that explains to you the nature of children, being a figure that is so full of idealism, for example. They have sporadic thoughts. They want to try everything, and it's within their nature of being curious, as what Sharon has explained. I think the LO already told you that this means that this leads to confusion. But what CO said that is different from OO is that not only this will lead to a confusion, but this will lead to a far bigger opportunity cost for the children. Not having plans, meaning you need to always invest in so many plans. Let's take OG and CG portrayal in this case, right? For example, I know I want to be an accountant, for example. So I'm going to sign up for accounting major. But exactly because life is so unpredictable, accounting firm might not recruit me and I'll end up being jobless, for example. I'll just deviate my plan to do music and creating TikTok to promote my music. But exactly, algorithm is unpredictable. You may go viral and make a living and you may not. So I'm just gonna make a business, but the customer is so unpredictable. What does this portrayal tells you? Unpredictability is not your justification and shield to bungee jumping from one thing to another thing to just finally create nothing. Under our side, like what Sharon have said about being resilient and so on and so forth. Under our side of the house, when you plan to do something, you calculate your initial steps. You envision what happened when you take certain paths, and you try to envision what you gain in the future because of that path, right? What is the portrayal under our side of the house? When I want to have a vacation to Europe, I need to have a good life where I can make 6 figures. I could be an accountant, then I would want to go to Harvard Business. In order to go to Harvard, I need to study and do a co-curricular activities. I know that getting into Harvard is hard and I might not get 6 figures, but if I study now, probably I would make 5 figures and it's okay. Maybe I could just deviate the plan to not doing a vacation in Europe, but just doing a vacation in Lampung to see the beaches, for example. And how does these children figure this thing out, right? We think their parents are the one that will, explain to them, and are the one that needs to explain to them that this options axis, this risk axis, and how could you overcome or deviate from the plan safely without harming yourself, right? From this portrait, you see that unpredictability is exactly the reason why humans like to organize and plan, because not only you can envision what kind of challenges you may face and how could you overcome it, but you also know what you want to gain initially, and that is the dopamine you exclusively get from CO to push children to undergo the lives even when they know that life is hard. This is important, as when Sharon said that self-actualization and exploration could happen in a safe manner only if parents direct the children to have this kind of dopamine or motivation to eventually bounce back, not telling them that life is so unpredictable, whatever you do is it will be infinite and so on and so forth. They never ensure to you why children will survive under their side of the house, right? In here, CO argues to you the role of parents is very important, not to organize the children to have plans and to stick with it, or as Sharon said, it is okay for the parents to to be a little bit restrictive, for example, because in every chances you change your decision, for example, when you decide to be generalist, like what OG wants, and try all plans along the way, the more opportunity costs like money, time, and meaningfulness in your life will cost the children and decrease their motivation, right? And we think that what the golf side wants is just bungee jumping from another thing the moment you fail, and then you fail again. In each of every fail that you experience under the side of the house, you will lose your motivation and so on and so forth. But this is not going to happen under our side, because you know that because at the end of the day we think that children knows and realize that they already try to dig what they can do based on what their parents told, for example, or they already try their best in calculating the risk and so on and so forth. And the moment they fail, they realize that it's something that is not their fault anymore, because that's what that is the best that they can do at that point of time, right? So I think this completed analysis from opening opposition and also negates everything that comes from government side regarding the importance of unpredictability that they never even explain under the side of the house, right? But I think these arguments also negates all of the arguments coming from government regarding mechanism, because they said that it is a better coping mechanism, and they never explain how likely it is for a human to blame the externalities under government side of the house, right? Under our side of the house, we think that because we already plan everything that we want under everything that we want to pursue and achieve at the end of the day, when it does not work, we know that it's not the right path for us. We know that it's not gonna make us happy, and we know what factors that make it fail, what factors that make us unhappy, for example, in the process of going through it. And this the exclusive thing that that is being a benefit on our side of the house, because we can deviate and we can take another path and learning from the things that is failing under our side of the house beforehand, right? But let's talk about more about government closing government, because they suddenly say that every parents will be blamed under our side of the house when the kids fail and so on and so forth. We don't understand why blaming the parents is the case in this debate, because not a single speech defined that the implication of this debate is that we will blame the parents if the kids fail. So I think the most important thing to talk about is how the motion looks like when applied to the children eventually, because children is the most affected actor by this motion. So I don't think their arguments about that will work. But then the whip decided to create a new argument that the teaching of having plan is not feasible. I think they're being dismissive. As Sharon has explained to you how calculation and executing fast exists and how it needs parents' involvement because they are at least a more reasonable and logical figure in comparison to the kids alone, then CG accuses us of not embracing mediocrity. We don't think that this is a symmetrical debate, right? We think that if the kids eventually realize that they're not privileged enough and they want to plan like to be a mediocre person at the end of the day, we think it's okay as long as they stick to that plan, right? So I don't understand why CG can overcome any other debate in any other batches in this debate. So what is the conclusion of my speech? I think we already taught to you that unpredictability is not something that you can use as a shield to not as a shield to not doing anything in your life, because eventually when you want to have a meaningful and you want to have a happy life, you can always have the option to calculate it, and you can always have the option to deviate from the plan at the end of the day, but in a safely manner. And the house very proud to oppose.
All right, thank you for that speech. That marks the end of the debate. So thank you so much, everyone. Kevin, we can stop the recording now.